Welcome back, Bubble Buds. It's time to make some non-binary Pride soap. Today the colors I'm using are black iron oxide, pow pow purple, and bright yellow raincoat, all from Mad Micas. I'm also using some titanium dioxide for the white layer, Carrie. Geez. And I'm doing that the same way that I did the white layer in the lesbian Pride soap, and that is to put the titanium dioxide in the lye solution. So you'll notice here too that pow pow purple looks kind of bluish before it has the lye solution added to it. And part of that's because it's a little bit iridescent as a mica. When you first mix it, it's got a bluish tint to it, which I think is actually pretty cool. But that doesn't show up when you use it in cold process. So this is the point in my soap making journey where I was like, you know what, I better double check my temperatures as I'm going here. And I'm operating here, I had 91 degrees on my oils and 136 still on my lye. The nice thing about dividing up the lye solution into small batches like that is they cool a lot easier. So I didn't need to wait very long for that temperature to come down, and then I was able to come back and go ahead and do that very first layer. As always, I'm using my favorite brambleberry molds. Makes about a 3-pound batch of soap when all is said and done, which gets me about 10 1-inch bars, which is pretty cool. And then again, like I said, I divide that lye solution up into these little containers, which are polypropylene, and I got those from our meal kit subscription. Sometimes some of their ingredients come in those little polypropylene jars, and I use them for lye. I wouldn't recommend maybe storing it in those, but in terms of like making it, mixing it, and measuring it out into individual little batches, it works really, really great. So the first layer, of course, for this is going to be the black layer. And with an iron oxide like this, you really have to very, very carefully mix that in. It's a pigment rather than a mica, and so you tend to get little grainy spots. It doesn't show up quite as much in the black unless you don't get enough black into the soap itself. Then you'll get like a dark gray with little black flecks in it. So what I'm going to do here is really work on mixing that in a little bit better. And that I do with the stick blender before I put the lye in it. If I did it after the lye, then I would have a problem with accelerating my trace, and you guys know I don't want that. For those of you that are watching this for the Pride Month portion of the soap making, I wanted to talk a little bit about why I chose to do a non-binary Pride soap for the month of June. Usually when you see Pride merch, you see a lot of rainbow-colored stuff. And then you will see the occasional, at least this year, I started to see more bisexual pride and more transgender pride. The bisexual pride is definitely a monetary thing. I can say this from my own experience with how quickly my bisexual pride soaps sold through. There's a lot more people out there that identify as bisexual than other parts of the alphabet mafia. The transgender part, I suspect, is a lot about visibility, and a lot about it being a issue that is being discussed quite a bit socially and in the news and culturally. We're talking about it a lot right now, and some companies are wanting to show support for that. And they think it's, going to make the money, or a little bit of both. So that's why you're starting to see a little more of that, I think. But what you don't see are some of the other identities that I have included here, like lesbian, like non-binary. We're going to talk about it, pansexual and asexual, and these are ones that you don't see quite as often. And I think with non-binary, part of that has to do with people not quite understanding it very much. But part of the reason I wanted to do this particular soap is one of my very best friends is non-binary, and they had an incident recently where, without getting into too much detail, they were basically publicly accused of basically not being part of the LGBTQ family by a cisgender gay man. And it really hurt, especially knowing that my friend had struggled for years to decide if they were non-binary or not. It was a really tough. I don't want to speak for them, but I know that it was tough to kind of decide if that was an identity they wanted to outwardly claim. And they basically, as a result of that, though, this encounter with this horrible individual that basically said bisexual people and non-binary people just want attention. It's essentially what he said. They decided to be completely out and completely make that call to, at least in their author life, to be completely out as non-binary. There are reasons why they chose to kind of keep it close-knit in real life for professional reasons, and some family things, I think, too, although not immediate family. And but I think it's really cool that they were able to finally go, you know what, no, this is who I am, and I'm going to claim it, and this person, this cisgender gay man, cannot take that away from me. And I think what this says to me, as someone who's experienced similar sentiment from the queer community, is that we need to be kinder to each other. We need to be more accepting. We have been marginalized, and gay men, lesbians, transgender individuals especially know this. And to then ostracize and alienate people who don't fit those descriptors because they're not queer enough for some reason, is just unconscionable to me, because it's anathema to me what queer culture is about. So, but also I understand that there's part of it that's like, I haven't been a part of the community for that long, and I haven't faced the same struggles. But at the same time, like, we're all in this together. We're fighting the cultural stigma surrounding being anything other than cisgender and straight. And I think that the more we stick together, the better it's going to be. And I think the more that we support any queer people of color, any queer indigenous people, that's going to only further our cause. The more accepting people become of all marginalizations, the better that is for all of us. And so that's my stance. Anyway, back to the non-binary part. So I had a really great conversation with my mom the other day about this. It's funny because she helps me pack orders, and she helps me, clean up and all that kind of stuff. Wow, my hair color is really uneven. Anyway, she helps me a lot with some of this stuff. And when we're boxing up a lot of the Pride orders, when we did the first pre-order and boxed all that up, she had a lot of learning to do about the different flags and what they meant. And I think she's still, not remembering all of them, but she's learning. And we were talking about the pink, purple, and blue one. And she said, "Which one is that?" And I pointed to myself, and she goes, "Oh, it's the bisexual one." And it was just a great little moment. And so in the process of talking about a lot of these other flags, the other day she asks me, "Well, okay, explain to me they, them pronouns." And I was like, gladly, I'm happy to explain this. And, part of me is not 100% sure I got it right, but I think I explained it in a way that my mother, who is a boomer, was able to understand and able to accept it and go, "Oh, okay, that makes sense to me." But I basically was saying, well, so this operates a lot. First of all, you have to understand that gender is a social construct. In other words, what makes something men's clothing or women's clothing, that is totally fabricated by our society. And she goes, "Yeah, that makes sense," because my mom has for a very long time bought men's clothing. This started largely because my mom and I both we're very much like apple-shaped people. We don't really have hips to speak of. And so for her, especially as a younger woman, she found that shopping in the men's and boys departments, she could find jeans and pants that fit her a little bit better. She also has what she calls particularly long arms, so she would buy men's shirts because they would have longer arms. So she understands that perspective of, okay, yeah, you're right. If I wear a men's shirt, that is a woman's shirt now because I'm a woman. So I started there. And I said, well, there are people that feel like a couple of things. One is that they don't believe in the gender binary, right? So they're just like, well, though I am not, this doesn't fit me. And so they choose to use they, them pronouns to say, I, don't identify as a man or a woman. I am a person, and that's their identity. And I said, but the they, them part is about expressing that outwardly. It also could be that they sometimes feel more masculine than feminine, and sometimes feel more feminine than masculine, or most days feel like neither, or always feel like neither. So it's a very broad spectrum. And so I kind of simplified as best I could to kind of talk to her about that. And her understanding, I could kind of see her kind of working in her mind about it. And so she said, okay, I understand that. And I said, and the thing is, that person is saying, call me by these pronouns is no different than a man named William saying, calling me Bill, and you honoring that and not calling him William or Willie or Billy or, whatever. You recognize that that's his chosen name. So when we talk about, our transgender brothers and sisters or non-binary folks, like, we really need to be talking about the ways that it makes sense to cisgendered, heteronormative people, because they do this already. They already use singular they, and they already use chosen names. So in that regard, especially for my mom, who is a very accepting person, it was easy for her to go, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. I get it. She has a pen name as an author, and she asks when we go to book conventions, that's what people call her. And I said, does that bother you? And she goes, no, I identify as that. And I'm like, well, there you go. And so I think that helped her to kind of understand that identity a little bit better. And as we're kind of like leaving my soap room, we're cleaning up for the day, she says, well, I think the other thing is too, I don't know anybody. And she happens to know my friend that is non-binary. They've met several times, absolutely love each other. They get along great. And I said, well, this friend is non-binary and they've chosen to go by the pronouns they, them. And she goes, oh, that's great. I love them. And that was it. That was the conversation. And it's all it took. Now, does that mean that my mom is automatically going to be, hey, have you talked to them? And not have you talked to her, right? Or have you talked to him? That doesn't mean that, because for an older person especially, that's a struggle. But what we can ask of them is when we correct them to not get offended and make it about themselves, right? And so I've set the stage now for when I say to my mom, them, and correct her. She goes, oh, that's right, them. She's not going to get defensive. She's going to understand that it would be like my dad. His name is Thomas, but he has never in his life gone by Thomas. As a child, he went by Tommy, and now he goes by Tom. Those are choices he made. Those are choices that his family made, but that is his choice. And, my mom still calls him Tom, even though they've been divorced for, a few decades. And so for that regard, she understands that element of it. So I think that when we approach this with older folks, particularly older Gen Xers and boomers, those that are willing to listen, willing to talk to us about it, I think those are really great ways to have that conversation because it's something they're familiar with. And I'm not saying that this is something that non-binary or trans folks need to do. That's on us. That's on cisgender people to help make that easier for them, right? To not make it where they always have to carry that emotional burden. And especially, I understand it especially well too, because as someone who is bisexual in a heterosexual presenting relationship, and this friend of mine who is a non-binary person in a heterosexual cisgender presenting relationship, we have privilege from that, yes, but also you're constantly having to come out if you want to continue to claim that queer identity to people. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to talk about it, if you want to educate people and all that, there's an emotional toll in that. There's I had a little oopsie in that one. There is a level of it's emotional labor, and it's tough sometimes. And I think it's nice to have an ally that can say, here's how to explain it, because it doesn't harm us if that person we're talking to doesn't get it right away. Whereas if we're talking to a non-binary person, if that non-binary person is having to defend their identity, that may actually do harm to them. That may hurt their feelings at best, or really do some damage at worst. Make them consider, God forbid, harming themselves. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to have those hard conversations when we can. And so I was really happy to be able to have that conversation for my mom. If she never meets another non-binary person, I've saved my friend from having to have that conversation with someone she doesn't really know very well and isn't sure how they would accept her. So there's the final soap. I'm really proud of how it turned out. I had a couple little slips in it, as you saw there, but overall, I'm really pleased with how it came out. The first round of it sold out, and I'm going to make more. So if you're interested in that soap, you can check out my website. It is thegildedbubble.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at The Gilded Bubble. Of course, my TikTok, my personal one blew up, so you'll have to find me at CPAC, PACK, and, be kind to each other. I really hope that we can be a little more accepting, especially in the month of June. And I hope you have a great week. Special thanks to my patrons, my dear friend Heidi, my mom Carol, and of course Kate. You guys are awesome. I always appreciate the support. And I will see you guys next week for a discussion of the transgender pride soap that I made. See you next time.